Here, Owen Les said, his smile widening as he set the takeout containers on Olivia Shaft's hospital tray table. You look like you could use a good meal. The 26-year-old gestured to the half-eaten steak, the cold mashed potatoes still bearing his fork marks, the picked-over lobster tail glistening under fluorescent lights. That's from Dominic's Steakhouse. You probably can't afford to eat there. Consider it a gift. His friends, Bradley and Tyler, laughed from across the semi-private room where they'd just finished gorging themselves on $300 worth of food. Bradley aimed his phone at Olivia's face, capturing her expression for his Instagram story. Must be quite a shock, right? Owen continued, straightening his Tom Ford suit jacket. Having someone like me visit. Most people in your situation never get this close to real success. Olivia didn't speak. Her left wrist sat elevated in a fresh cast, fractured when Owen's matte black G-Wagon had sent her sprawling across the crosswalk just hours earlier. A butterfly bandage covered the cut on her forehead. An IV drip fed slowly into her right arm. She simply looked at him with eyes that held something the nurses at the station recognized but couldn't name. Something that made them turn away, unable to watch but too afraid to intervene. None of them understood that Owen Les had just fed his leftover garbage to the wife of Captain Shaft, Kim Jae-sung. The Shadow King who controlled every gambling den, protection racket, and information network in Millbrook's underworld. A man who'd built his empire on one unbreakable principle. Those who disrespect what he loves are destroyed, completely and without mercy. Before we continue, comment where in the world you're watching from and hit subscribe, because tomorrow's chapter shows exactly what happens when privilege meets consequence. Owen Les woke at 10 a.m. on Tuesday to sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Millbrook like a kingdom. His bedroom was larger than most studio apartments in the Western District, a space decorated by an interior designer who'd flown in from Milan to capture what she called sophisticated masculine energy. The California king bed sat beneath a chandelier that cost $42,000. Owen had never asked the price. His walk-in closet held over 300 pieces, Tom Ford suits worn once to charity galas, Gucci sneakers still in boxes, designer jeans with tags attached. He selected a casual outfit that cost $6,000, Saint Laurent jeans, a Balenciaga hoodie, limited edition off-white Jordans. His Richard Mille watch alone was worth $250,000, a graduation gift he'd forgotten about within a week. Downstairs, his private chef prepared eggs Benedict with smoked salmon and truffle-infused hollandaise. Owen scrolled through Instagram while eating. His account, @OwenLess, had gained 300 followers overnight. The latest post, him on his father's yacht captioned, "Tuesday Mood," had 17,000 likes. The comments fed his worldview like gasoline, living the dream bro. This is what success looks like. Goals. Owen rarely responded. They existed as abstract admirers, not real people with real struggles. Their praise confirmed what he believed, that he deserved this life, that his father's wealth was earned, that the world naturally divided into winners and losers. Senator Richard Les's corruption had built this bubble with precision. For 15 years, he'd diverted government funds meant for affordable housing, healthcare, and education into offshore accounts. Every broken streetlight in the Western District that stayed dark for months, every underfunded clinic that couldn't afford equipment, each represented money flowing into Senator Les's accounts. Owen had never questioned where it came from. At Prestige Academy, where tuition exceeded $60,000 per year, every student came from similar backgrounds. Poverty wasn't systemic, it was personal failing, a choice made by people too lazy to succeed. When Owen's driver occasionally took routes through the Western District, Owen would stare through tinted windows at crumbling buildings and feel confused disgust. Why didn't these people just move somewhere nicer? Why didn't they ask their parents for loans? What Owen didn't know was that today would be the last day he'd ever feel invincible, the last day before everything his father built would burn. The matte black G-Wagon sat in the circular driveway like a predator. Owen ran his hand along the custom bodywork while Bradley and Tyler pulled up in Bradley's Audi R8, phones already out and filming. "Bro, this is insane," Bradley said, circling the vehicle. "The exhaust system? Modified," Owen grinned. "Wait until you hear it." He turned the key. The engine roared with a sound that triggered car alarms up and down the street, a deep, aggressive rumble announcing dominance and wealth. Tyler whooped from the backseat. Bradley posted to Instagram, "Richboy shit hits different." Owen pulled out doing 40 in a residential zone, blowing through a yellow light. "Western District," he announced. "Roads are empty there. Perfect for testing this out." The transition happened gradually, then all at once. Manicured lawns became chain-link fences. New construction became boarded windows. Owen accelerated to 50 in a 30 zone. The modified exhaust thundered off apartment buildings, waking people who'd just fallen asleep after night shifts. He never saw Olivia Shaft step into the crosswalk. The impact happened at 35 miles per hour. Olivia's body hit the hood with a sickening thud, her wrist snapping, her forehead catching the hood ornament before she rolled onto the pavement. Shopping bags exploded. The glass jar of sauce shattered, spreading red across concrete. Owen's first instinct was to accelerate. But then he saw the police cruiser 2 blocks down. "Delete the video," he hissed. "Delete it now." Lieutenant Morrison approached before Owen could speak. Everyone in Millbrook PD knew the Less family. "Mr. Less," Morrison said carefully. "I'll call an ambulance." Owen looked down at the woman, beautiful even crumpled on pavement, scrubs marking her as some healthcare worker. "Someone unimportant. Are you all right?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "Morrison, handle this quietly. I'll cover medical expenses." Olivia said nothing, just looked at him with eyes that held something ancient and patient. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Owen stood aside, checking his phone, already moving past this inconvenience. He didn't ask her name. Didn't apologize. Morrison approached quietly. "No charges, Mr. Less. Just, slow down in residential areas." Owen nodded, climbing back into the G-Wagon. As they drove away, nervous laughter returned. "That was close, man," Tyler said. "It's handled," Owen replied. He'd stop by the hospital later, pay whatever bills, maybe send flowers. What Owen didn't understand was that the woman on that pavement had already decided his fate. And that some phone calls change everything. Owen arrived at Millbrook General Hospital at 7 p.m., 3 hours after the accident. He'd gone home first to shower and change into a fresh Tom Ford suit. Navy blue with a crisp white shirt, no tie. The look said, concerned but casual, perfect for the Instagram post he was already composing in his head about his charitable hospital visit. Bradley and Tyler flanked him like an entourage as they walked through the emergency department. Nurses glanced up, then quickly away. Everyone recognized the Less family. Challenging them meant unemployment, possibly worse. "Room 247, a nurse said quietly, pointing down the corridor. Owen found Olivia in a semi-private room, her wrist in a white cast, butterfly bandage on her forehead, IV drip feeding into her right arm. She was sitting up slightly, her dark eyes tracking him as he entered with his friends. "Well, you're looking better than earlier," Owen announced, not bothering to introduce himself. "I've paid your medical bills." "You're welcome." Olivia's expression didn't change. She said nothing. Owen interpreted her silence as gratitude mixed with awe. Poor people were always grateful when rich people acknowledged their existence. Must be quite a shock, right? Having someone like me visit. Most people in your situation never get this close to real success. Bradley snickered. Tyler checked his phone, already bored. "We're starving," Owen continued, pulling out his phone. "All this humanitarian work makes you hungry." He laughed at his own joke, scrolling through DoorDash. Dominic's Steakhouse. Free ribeyes with lobster tails. Load it up. The food arrived 30 minutes later in elegant bags with the restaurant's gold logo. A hospital orderly delivered it looking uncomfortable, glancing at Olivia before leaving quickly. Owen and his friends spread the feast across the empty bed in the semi-private room, ignoring the curtain separating them from Olivia. 3 perfectly cooked ribeyes, 3 massive lobster tails, loaded potatoes with bacon and sour cream, Caesar salads, a selection of sides and desserts. The portions were enormous, designed for excess rather than need. They ate with the loud satisfaction of men who'd never questioned whether food would be available. Owen cut into his steak, the meat pink and perfect, and took photos for Instagram before each bite. Bradley cracked lobster shells with his hands, butter dripping onto the hospital sheets. Tyler scrolled through TikTok while eating, occasionally showing them videos and laughing. Olivia lay in her bed 10 feet away, watching in silence. The nurses at the station could see everything through the glass partition. None of them intervened. None of them could. 20 minutes later, Owen pushed back from the demolished feast, surveying the wreckage. Half a steak remained, the edges brown and cold, visible fork marks in the meat. Mashed potatoes congealed in their container. The picked-over remains of a lobster tail sat in a pool of butter that had solidified into white grease. He stood, stretching, and gathered the leftovers into their containers. Then he walked to Olivia's bedside and set them on her tray table with the air of someone bestowing a tremendous gift. "Here," he said, smiling. "You look like you could use a good meal. That's from Dominic's Steakhouse, you probably can't afford to eat there. Consider it a gift." The nurses at the station turned away. They couldn't watch but were too afraid to stop it. Owen waited for gratitude. When Olivia remained silent, just staring at the containers with that unreadable expression, he shrugged. "Anyway, we're even now. Medical bills paid, dinner provided. Try to be more careful crossing streets in the future." He left with Bradley and Tyler, already forgetting the encounter before reaching the elevator. What Owen didn't see was Olivia reaching for her phone with her uninjured hand. Didn't hear the single word she spoke after his footsteps faded. "Yeobo." Olivia waited until Owen's footsteps faded completely. Until the elevator dinged and carried him away. Only then did she push the containers of leftover food to the far edge of her tray table where she wouldn't have to see them. Her wrist throbbed beneath the cast. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, controlled fury building in her chest. Rage she'd learned long ago to master because letting it out meant losing everything. Growing up in Millbrook's Western District had taught Olivia that survival required intelligence over emotion. Her neighborhood was 15 minutes and a world away from Owen's mansion, buildings with broken doors, sidewalks cracked and heaving, corner stores with bars on windows. Her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them in a 1-bedroom apartment. Olivia had slept on the couch from age 12 to 18, doing homework by streetlight when electricity got shut off. She'd watched her mother die at 47 from diabetes that could have been managed with proper health care they couldn't afford. Watched the system protect people like Owen while grinding people like her into dust. But Olivia had refused to be ground down. She'd graduated high school with a 4.0, earned a scholarship to community college, and taken a job as a nurse's aide at Millbrook Community Clinic. She worked double shifts, sometimes triples, saving every dollar toward medical school. Her apartment was small but immaculate. Her scrubs always pressed. She gave the world no ammunition to judge her. That's what had impressed Captain Shaft when they first met. 3 years ago, Kim Jae-sung had been rushed into the ER with a gunshot wound, a rival gang's failed assassination attempt. Other nurses had whispered nervously, afraid to touch that criminal. But Olivia had simply walked to his gurney, examined the wound with professional efficiency, and started an IV line. "You're not afraid of me," he'd said. "You're bleeding out," Olivia had replied. "I'm a nurse. Your reputation doesn't change my job." Her lack of fear had intrigued him. Her refusal to be impressed had captivated him. 6 months later, they married in a private ceremony that doubled as a peace negotiation between 3 criminal organizations. But Olivia had made one absolute condition: she would maintain her normal life. Her job, her apartment, her privacy. She refused to become a trophy wife. Captain Shaft had agreed, understanding that his wife's strength came from her independence. He kept their marriage secret. To the world, Olivia Shaft was simply a hard-working nurse's aide. To her husband's organization, she was the untouchable line no one crossed. For 3 years, she'd never asked him to intervene. Never used his name to solve problems. She'd maintained the boundary between her world and his, believing she could build her future through her own merit. But staring at the leftover food Owen Les had given her like charity, Olivia understood that some boundaries couldn't hold. That the system would always protect people like Owen while humiliating people like her. She picked up her phone with her uninjured hand. The line connected after 2 rings. "Yeobo," she said quietly. "We need to talk." What Olivia didn't know was that those 4 words would destroy a political dynasty. That her husband had been waiting 3 years for someone to give him a reason. And that Owen Less had just made the last mistake of his privileged life. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next will show you exactly why some people should never be underestimated. Comment below where you're watching from. The phone call that would end Owen Less's world lasted exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds. Captain Shaft answered on the second ring. He always did when Olivia called, no matter what meeting he was in, what negotiation he was conducting, what empire business required his attention. Her number was programmed to override everything. Yeobo, Olivia said quietly, her voice steady despite the pain radiating from her wrist. We need to talk. There was a pause. In the background, she could hear muffled voices, then silence as her husband stepped away from wherever he was. Are you hurt? His accent thickened slightly when he was concerned, Korean inflections bleeding through his carefully practiced English. I'm at Millbrook General, room 247. She kept her voice clinical, detached, the way she reported patient conditions during shift changes. A car hit me this afternoon. Fractured wrist, minor head injury. I'm fine. Another pause, longer this time. When Captain Shaft spoke again, his voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet that his lieutenants knew meant someone was about to die. Who? Owen Less, Senator Richard Less's son. Olivia looked at the leftover food containers on her tray table, the congealed mashed potatoes, the cold steak with visible fork marks. He was speeding through the Western District in a new luxury SUV. Hit me in a crosswalk. Police were there but didn't charge him because of who his father is. I'm coming to the hospital. No. Olivia's voice remained calm but firm. I don't want you here. The nurses would talk, and I don't need questions about why the city's most dangerous man is visiting a nurse's aide. She heard him take a breath, heard the effort it took for him to respect her boundary when every instinct was screaming at him to come to her. This was why their marriage worked. He understood that protecting her meant honoring her choices, even when it killed him. Tell me everything, he said. So Olivia did. She described the accident with the same clinical precision she used to document medical charts. The G-Wagon. The 3 young men filming on their phones. Owen's annoyance rather than concern. Lieutenant Morrison refusing to file charges. The hospital visit 3 hours later, Owen in his designer suit, treating his obligation as charity, ordering expensive food for himself and his friends. They ate in my room, Olivia said, her voice still level. Ribeye steaks and lobster tails from Dominic's Steakhouse. Ate until they were full, laughing and filming for social media while I lay here with a broken wrist from his car. And then? Captain Shaft's voice had gone so quiet she could barely hear it. And then he gathered up the leftovers, half-eaten steak, cold potatoes with his fork marks still in them, picked over lobster, and brought them to my bedside like he was doing me a favor. He said, "You look like you could use a good meal. That's from Dominic's Steakhouse, you probably can't afford to eat there. Consider it a gift." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 10 seconds. 15, 20. Olivia could hear her husband breathing, could imagine him standing wherever he was, processing what she'd told him, calculating his response. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I'll handle it. 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words that meant Owen Less's privileged life was over. 3 words that would topple a political dynasty. 3 words that would prove money couldn't protect you from shadows you didn't know existed. I don't want you to, Olivia started. I know what you want, Captain Shaft interrupted gently. You want justice. You want the system to work the way it's supposed to. But we both know it doesn't. Not for people like us. Not when men like Senator Less own the police and the courts and the politicians. Olivia said nothing because he was right. Get some rest, her husband continued. I'll send someone to bring you home tomorrow. Don't worry about medical bills or time off work. And Olivia? He paused. You were right to call me. Some things I can't ignore. The line went dead. Olivia set her phone down, staring at the hospital ceiling. She'd just unleashed a force that Owen Less couldn't comprehend. And somewhere across the city, Captain Shaft was already making calls that would burn everything the Less family had built to the ground. The call that would destroy Owen Less's world had just ended, but Captain Shaft didn't move. He stood in the private office above his restaurant in the Western District, phone still in hand, staring at nothing while his mind calculated trajectories of revenge. Kim Jae-sung had immigrated to America at 15 with nothing but a duffel bag and his mother's funeral money sewn into his jacket lining. His father had been killed by a rival gang in Seoul. His mother had died 6 months later from grief that manifested as heart failure. The distant uncle in Millbrook who'd sponsored his visa had put him to work washing dishes in a Korean restaurant, paying him $3 an hour under the table. At 15, Jae-sung spoke almost no English. At 16, he was fluent enough to negotiate. At 17, he was collecting protection money for a local gang. At 18, he'd eliminated 3 rival organizations and taken control of the Western District's underground economy. At 19, people stopped calling him by his birth name and started calling him Captain Shaft, a nickname that stuck because he moved through the city like a shadow, untouchable and everywhere at once. Now, at 32, he controlled gambling, protection, smuggling, and information networks that stretched across 3 states. Politicians came to him for campaign contributions laundered through legitimate businesses. Police captains warned him about federal investigations before they happened. Judges owed him favors that would never be repaid. His empire was built on 2 principles: absolute loyalty to his people, and brutal retaliation against anyone who showed disrespect. But Captain Shaft's greatest strength wasn't violence, it was patience. He never acted on impulse. Never let emotion override strategy. Every move was calculated 3 steps ahead, every response calibrated for maximum impact with minimum exposure. That's why Olivia's identity remained secret. His enemies would target her to hurt him. His allies would expect her to become a trophy, displayed at events to demonstrate his power. But Olivia had chosen him precisely because he understood that love meant protection, not possession. That her strength came from independence, not from standing in his shadow. So he'd kept their marriage known only to his innermost circle, 5 men who'd been with him since the beginning, who understood that revealing Olivia's connection to him would be signing their own death warrant. For 3 years, that arrangement had worked. Olivia lived her normal life. Captain Shaft built his empire. Their worlds remained separate except for the nights when he'd come to her small apartment, leaving his reputation at the door, being simply Jae-sung, the man who loved a woman strong enough to see him as human. But Owen had just crossed the one line that couldn't be uncrossed. Captain Shaft set his phone down carefully and pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Gather everyone," he said in Korean. Conference room. 10 minutes. His second-in-command, Lee Min-jun, knew better than to ask questions. "Yes," he younged him. Within the hour, 5 men would sit around a table covered with intelligence files the Less family didn't know existed. And by dawn, Senator Richard Less's carefully constructed empire would begin burning from foundations he'd never thought to protect. The conference room sat in the basement of Captain Shaft's restaurant, accessed through a kitchen walk-in freezer that concealed a reinforced steel door. The space was soundproof, windowless, and swept for surveillance devices twice daily. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs that had hosted negotiations, confessions, and sentences that were never officially recorded. 5 men filed in within 8 minutes of the summons. Lee Min-jun arrived first, Captain Shaft's second-in-command, a former Korean Special Forces operative who'd immigrated illegally and found legitimacy through loyalty. Then Park Dae-young, who managed the gambling operations. Song Tae-min, who handled protection and enforcement. Yuki Tanaka, the information specialist who'd worked for Japanese Yakuza before crossing the ocean. And finally, Viktor Kozlov, the Russian money launderer who'd defected from the Bratva 5 years ago. These 5 men knew about Olivia. They were the only ones who did. Captain Shaft stood at the head of the table, his expression carved from ice. "Owen hit my wife with his car this afternoon," he said in Korean, his native language the only one he trusted for conversations like this. Then he fed her his leftover food like she was a dog. The room went absolutely silent. Lee Min-jun's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon. Park Dae-young's jaw clenched. Song Tae-min leaned forward, ready for orders. Yuki and Victor exchanged glances that said they already understood what was coming. "We can't touch him directly," Lee said after a moment, switching to English because Victor's Korean was still weak. "Not immediately. Senator Less would mobilize the entire police department. Federal investigations, media scrutiny, Too much exposure. We don't need to touch him directly, Captain Shaft replied, also in English now. We need to destroy everything he values first. Let him watch his world burn. Let him feel what it's like to lose everything. Then, when he has nothing left, when everyone has abandoned him, when he finally understands what powerlessness feels like, then I'll visit him personally. He pressed a button on the wall. A screen descended, and Yuki opened a laptop, connecting to the projection system. The first image appeared, Senator Richard Less's official portrait, smiling with American flags behind him. We've been collecting intelligence on the Less family for 6 years, Captain Shaft continued. Insurance. The senator's corruption touched our territory twice, once when he tried to shut down businesses we protect, once when his office investigated our front companies. We built these files in case we ever needed leverage. Yuki clicked through slides. Bank statements, property records, shell company registrations, offshore account numbers, communication logs, the accumulated evidence of 15 years of systematic theft, all meticulously documented and cross-referenced. Senator Less owns a pharmaceutical distribution company, Captain Shaft said. Officially legitimate. In reality, it's his primary money laundering operation. The warehouse on Industrial Boulevard holds approximately $15 million in inventory and serves as the hub for his financial manipulations. All his false accounting, all his digital records, stored there because he doesn't trust cloud services. Park Dae-young smiled slowly. You want us to burn it. Tonight, 2:47 a.m. exactly. Make it look electrical. The fire marshal's office has 3 inspectors on our payroll who'll write the report we need. Song Tae-min nodded, already calculating logistics. The warehouse has security, but nothing we can't handle. In and out in 20 minutes. While the warehouse burns, Captain Shaft continued, Yuki will be accessing Senator Less's private office downtown. His personal safe contains physical copies of documents he keeps off computers, the truly incriminating evidence. Bank statements showing offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Ledgers detailing embezzled government funds going back to his first term. Communications with co-conspirators. Evidence of bribes paid and favors traded. Yuki's fingers flew across his keyboard. His office security system uses biometric tech solutions. I cracked their master encryption 3 years ago. I can loop their cameras, spoof their motion sensors, and be in and out in 40 minutes. The safe itself is a Browning ProSteel, combination lock, fire-rated. I'll need 30 minutes to crack it, but I've practiced on the same model. Once we have the documents, Captain Shaft said, we release everything simultaneously. WikiLeaks. Every major news outlet. Social media with targeted hashtags that will trend within hours. Federal prosecutors. SEC investigators. IRS Criminal Division. Interpol, because some of his accounts touch foreign banks. We flood every channel at once so he can't contain it. Victor leaned back, whistling low. This will destroy him completely. Federal charges. Asset seizure. His entire family's wealth traced and confiscated. Senator Less will die in prison. Good, Captain Shaft said simply. Lee Min-jun studied the timeline on screen. What about Owen? While his father's empire burns, what happens to the son? Captain Shaft's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes, something his lieutenants recognized as the look that preceded permanent solutions. Owen Less will watch everything collapse in real time on television and Twitter. His father's disgrace. Their mansion seized. His trust fund frozen. His friends abandoning him. His social media followers disappearing by the thousands. He'll watch and he won't understand why. He won't connect his actions to these consequences because people like him never do. He paused, letting the silence build. And then, when he's lost everything, when he's alone in that mansion watching federal agents inventory his family's possessions, when he's scrolling through his phone seeing his entire life dismantled. That's when I'll visit him. That's when he'll learn exactly who my wife is. And that's when he'll understand that some debts are paid in full. The 5 men around the table nodded. They'd all been with Captain Shaft long enough to know that this wasn't about revenge. It was about principle, about the unbreakable rule that had kept their organization strong for over a decade. Those who disrespect what we love are destroyed, completely and without mercy. We move tonight, Captain Shaft said. Song, take your team to the warehouse. Yuki, the office is yours. Take Victor for the safe. Lee, coordinate communications and cleanup. Park, I want eyes on Owen less. Track his location, monitor his phone, document everything. When this starts, I want to know exactly where he is and what he's doing. He looked at each man in turn. Questions? There were none. These were professionals who'd executed operations far more complex than this. A warehouse fire and a break-in were simple compared to what they'd accomplished in the past. Then move. And remember, we're ghosts. No evidence. No witnesses. No connections to us. As far as the world knows, Senator Less's empire collapsed because whistleblowers finally acted, because his greed finally caught up to him. We're just shadows watching the inevitable. As the 5 men filed out to begin the operation that would destroy a political dynasty, Captain Shaft remained at the table, staring at the image of Owen Less smiling in his Instagram profile. The young man had no idea that his last day of privilege was already over. That by this time tomorrow, he'd understand what it meant to be powerless. And that within 72 hours, he'd learn exactly what happened when you fed garbage to a Shadow King's wife. Song Tae Min's team moved through the Industrial Boulevard warehouse district like smoke at 2:34 a.m. 3 vehicles, lights off, parking in blind spots where security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned 30 minutes earlier. 6 men total, dressed in coveralls that matched the maintenance crews who serviced these buildings during night shifts. The pharmaceutical warehouse owned by Senator Less sat on 2 acres, a massive steel structure holding millions in inventory, or so the insurance paperwork claimed. In reality, the building served a different purpose. The back offices housed servers containing 15 years of false accounting. File cabinets held physical ledgers documenting money laundering operations. The inventory was real enough to pass insurance inspections but existed primarily to justify the business that transformed stolen government funds into legitimate income. Song's team bypassed the perimeter fence at a weak point they'd scouted 3 days earlier. The security guard on duty was watching videos on his phone, as he did every night between 2 and 4 a.m. His rounds were predictable. Main entrance at 2:15, backloading dock at 2:45. He'd already completed the first. The second would be interrupted. They entered through a service door using a cloned access card Yuki had created from stolen RFID data. Inside, the warehouse was exactly as the blueprints showed, rows of inventory in the front, offices and server room in the back. Song moved directly to the electrical panel while his team positioned accelerants with professional precision. The fire had to look accidental. No obvious origin points. No chemical traces that would raise questions. Just old wiring, overloaded circuits, and the tragic result when maintenance was deferred to save costs. Song had burned 14 buildings in his career. He knew exactly how to make fire investigators see what he wanted them to see. At 2:47 a.m. exactly, he threw the switch. The electrical surge was real, carefully engineered but real. Sparks erupted from multiple junction boxes simultaneously. The accelerants caught instantly, flames spreading with calculated efficiency toward the server room where Senator Less's most incriminating records sat on hard drives that would melt within minutes. Song's team was already moving back toward the exits. 13 minutes from entry to extraction. The security guard would notice the smoke in approximately 90 seconds, call 911, and discover that his fire suppression system had mysteriously failed to activate. By 2:52 a.m., Song was in his vehicle 3 blocks away, watching flames visible above the warehouse roofline. By 2:55 a.m., sirens were converging. By 3 a.m., the fire was fully involved, $15 million in inventory becoming ash, money laundering records becoming smoke, 15 years of carefully constructed financial crimes becoming untraceable. Owen Less woke at 3:17 a.m. to his phone buzzing with alerts. His father was calling, then his father's assistant, then numbers he didn't recognize. He answered groggily, annoyed at being disturbed. Turn on the news, Senator Less said, his voice tight with panic Owen had never heard before. Channel 7. Now. Owen fumbled for his bedroom remote, clicking to the local news station. The footage showed a massive warehouse engulfed in flames, fire trucks spraying water that did nothing to control the inferno. The chyron read, breaking, Senator Less's pharmaceutical warehouse destroyed by fire. Dad, what? Get downstairs, now. Owen found his father in the study, still in pajamas, staring at a laptop showing security footage from the warehouse. Or rather, footage that cut to static at 2:34 a.m. and never resumed. His father's face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he dialed number after number. Insurance companies, fire marshals, private investigators. How bad is it? Owen asked, not really understanding why his father looked terrified rather than just angry. Senator Les didn't answer immediately. He was calculating losses, trying to determine what records had been in that building, what evidence had just gone up in smoke, or worse, what evidence might have been taken before the fire started. The inventory's insured, he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. But the records. Owen, there were files in that building that can't be replaced. Owen still didn't understand. To him, it was just a business setback, an insurance claim, a temporary inconvenience. He'd never grasped that his father's wealth wasn't legitimate, that the pharmaceutical company was a front, that those records were evidence of crimes that could send Senator Les to federal prison for the rest of his life. They watched the news coverage until dawn, watching firefighters declare the building a total loss, watching investigators begin their preliminary assessment. Senator Les made 43 phone calls in 4 hours, each one more desperate than the last. Neither of them noticed the real problem wasn't the warehouse burning. The real problem was already underway 3 miles away, where Yuki Tanaka was opening Senator Les's private office safe and photographing documents that would end a political dynasty. By the time the sun rose over Millbrook, the fire would be yesterday's crisis. Because the documents Yuki was uploading to encrypted servers would become today's catastrophe, and Owen Les still had no idea that his life was about to burn faster than any warehouse ever could. This is where everything changes. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next will show you exactly how fast power can crumble. Drop a comment with your country and let's watch this empire fall together. While Senator Les watched his warehouse burn, Yuki Tanaka was 3 miles away in the senator's private downtown office, photographing the contents of a Browning Pro-Steel safe that had taken him 27 minutes to crack. The documents inside were exactly what Captain Shaft's intelligence had predicted. Bank statements showing accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore, accounts holding over $43 million that had never appeared on any tax return. Ledgers written in Senator Les's own handwriting, detailing 15 years of embezzled government funds with clinical precision. $2.3 million from Affordable Housing Initiative, FY 2019. $1.8 million from Education Technology Grant, FY 2020. $4.1 million from Healthcare Modernization Fund, FY 2021. Communication logs with co-conspirators, other politicians, contractors who'd submitted fraudulent bids, accountants who'd helped structure the shell companies. Evidence of bribes paid to secure votes, favors traded for campaign contributions, threats made against whistleblowers. Every transaction documented because Senator Les was meticulous, never imagining these records would leave his private safe. Yuki photographed 374 pages in 41 minutes. Each image was automatically uploaded to an encrypted server that would distribute the files through channels designed for maximum impact and zero traceability. By 4:52 a.m., he was out of the building, security footage showing nothing but empty hallways, the safe's combination reset, no evidence anyone had been there. At 12 p.m. exactly, noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific, peak social media engagement hours, the documents went live simultaneously across 17 platforms. WikiLeaks published the complete archive with the heading, Senator Richard Les, 15 Years of Systematic Government Theft. The New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all received encrypted packages containing the most damning evidence, each outlet racing to break the story first. Twitter accounts created specifically for this purpose began posting excerpts with the hashtag #LesCorruption, tagging journalists, activists, and political watchdog organizations. Local Millbrook news stations received physical packages delivered by courier. USB drives containing spreadsheets that showed exactly which government programs had been gutted, which communities had been damaged, which promises had been broken while Senator Les's offshore accounts grew. Federal prosecutors at the Department of Justice received complete copies with referral letters from anonymous sources. The SEC got documentation of securities fraud. The IRS Criminal Division received evidence of tax evasion spanning a decade. Interpol was notified about international banking violations. The response was instantaneous and catastrophic. #less corruption began trending on Twitter within 30 minutes. By 1 p.m., it was the #1 topic nationwide. By 2 p.m., it had generated over 2 million tweets. Journalists who'd been friendly to Senator Les suddenly demanded answers. News anchors who'd praised his fiscal responsibility now called for his resignation. Political analysts dissected the documents on live television, explaining in detail how government funds meant for schools and hospitals had been diverted into personal accounts. Citizens who'd suffered from the senator's policies finally had proof. Teachers whose schools operated with broken equipment. Families who'd waited years for affordable housing that was never built. Patients who'd been denied healthcare funding. They flooded social media with their stories, connecting their personal struggles directly to the numbers in Senator Les's ledgers. Owen watched it unfold on his phone in real time, his Instagram feed filling with posts about his father's corruption. Friends who'd commented goals on his yacht photos yesterday were now silent. His follower count began dropping, not slowly, but hemorrhaging by the thousands. Comments on his old posts turned vicious. This is where stolen money goes. Your whole life is built on theft. Hope prison food is better than Dominic's Steakhouse. Senator Les's office released a statement at 2:47 p.m. calling the documents fabricated and politically motivated. The statement lasted 17 minutes before being overwhelmed by forensic analysts confirming the document's authenticity, handwriting experts verifying the ledgers, and former staffers coming forward to corroborate the evidence. By 4 p.m., 3 of Senator Les's political allies had publicly called for his resignation. By 5 p.m., the number was 12. By 6 p.m., his own party's leadership was demanding he step down pending investigation. Protesters gathered outside the Les mansion by early evening. Not violent, but present. Hundreds of citizens holding signs that read, "Return our money," and "Millbrook deserves better," and 15 years of lies. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of the growing crowd. Owen stood at his bedroom window watching the protesters, watching news vans set up on the street, watching his father's world collapse in real time. He still didn't connect it to the woman he'd hit with his car yesterday. Still didn't understand that the warehouse fire and the document leak were coordinated. Still believed this was just bad luck, bad timing, maybe political enemies finally acting. His phone buzzed with another notification. His bank had frozen his accounts pending investigation into the source of his trust fund. His credit cards were declined. His world was contracting by the hour, and he couldn't comprehend why. What Owen didn't know was that the exposure was just the beginning. That while he watched protesters on the street, Captain Shaft was planning something far more personal. That in 72 hours, Owen would learn exactly whose wife he'd fed his garbage to. And that some lessons are taught in darkness, where money and privilege mean absolutely nothing. The cascade of consequences accelerated faster than Owen had thought possible. Wednesday morning, he woke to federal agents serving a warrant at 6:47 a.m. A dozen men in FBI windbreakers walking through the mansion his father had bought with stolen money, tagging furniture, photographing artwork, inventorying assets that would soon be seized. Senator Les sat in his study with 3 lawyers who'd flown in overnight, all of them speaking in urgent whispers about asset protection strategies that were already too late. His phone rang constantly with calls he didn't answer, former allies, campaign donors, business partners, all distancing themselves from a sinking ship. By noon, the Senate Majority Leader held a press conference calling for Senator Les's immediate resignation. By 2 p.m., the governor announced a special investigation. By 4 p.m., federal prosecutors filed formal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement of government funds, tax evasion, conspiracy. 17 counts, each carrying potential prison sentences measured in decades. Owen watched it unfold from his bedroom, scrolling through social media that had turned completely hostile. His Instagram followers dropped from 47,300 to 31,200 by Wednesday afternoon, to 18,400 by Thursday morning. His DMs filled with messages calling him a thief, a fraud, the son of a criminal. Brands that had sent him free products demanded them back. The exclusive gym where he worked out with a private trainer revoked his membership. His friends stopped responding to texts. Bradley posted an Instagram story. Disappointed to learn the truth about people I thought I knew. Tyler simply unfollowed him without comment. Every social connection Owen had assumed was friendship revealed itself as transactional. People who'd wanted proximity to wealth and power, now fleeing the stench of scandal. The protesters outside grew daily. By Thursday, there were over 1,000 people, teachers, healthcare workers, families who'd been denied services while Senator less enriched himself. News vans lined the street. Helicopters circled overhead. Owen couldn't leave the house without cameras documenting his every move. Friday morning, the final blow, federal marshals arrived with a seizure order. The mansion, the cars, the artwork, the furniture, everything purchased with embezzled funds now belonged to the government pending asset forfeiture proceedings. Senator and Owen less had 72 hours to vacate. Owen stood in his bedroom, the California king bed, the $42,000 chandelier, the walk-in closet with 300 pieces of designer clothing, and understood for the first time that it was all disappearing. His father's wealth wasn't legitimate. His entire life had been built on theft. And now the bill was coming due. What Owen still didn't understand was that losing his mansion was nothing compared to what was coming. That somewhere in the Western District, Captain Shaft was preparing a lesson that would be delivered in darkness. And that some debts can't be paid with money. Owen was scrolling through his phone at 2:34 a.m. on Saturday when the window opened behind him. He'd been lying in bed, still his bed for another 48 hours before federal marshals removed everything, watching his social media collapse in real time. His follower count had dropped to 11,200. Former friends were posting stories about how they'd always known something was off about the Less family. His father was downstairs with lawyers, planning their move to a hotel since their accounts were frozen and they couldn't access funds to rent an apartment. Owen had turned off most of the lights, just his phone screen illuminating his face in the darkness. He was reading comments on his latest post, a photo from 2 weeks ago on his father's yacht that now had 3,000 replies calling him a thief, a fraud, the son of a criminal. He didn't hear the window slide open. Didn't sense the figure crossing his room until a hand clamped over his mouth and another seized his throat, dragging him off the bed and slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Owen's phone clattered to the floor, its screen casting dim light across the face of the man holding him, Korean, maybe early 30s, wearing all black, eyes that held something Owen had never seen directed at him before, absolute, controlled hatred. "Make a sound and I break your neck," the man said quietly in accented English. "Nod if you understand." Owen nodded frantically, terror flooding his system. This wasn't arrest or investigation or legal consequences. This was violence, immediate and personal, and his father's influence meant nothing in this moment. Captain Shaft released Owen's throat but kept one hand on his shoulder, holding him against the wall. 3 days ago, you hit my wife with your car. Do you remember? Owen's mind raced. The accident. The black woman in scrubs. The hospital visit. I paid her medical bills. The punch to his ribs was so fast Owen didn't see it coming. Just felt the impact, felt something crack, felt pain explode through his chest that made him double over gasping. Captain Shaft caught him before he fell, held him upright. You paid nothing, Captain Shaft said softly. You bought nothing. You fixed nothing. Another punch, same spot. Another rib breaking. Owen tried to scream but no sound came out, his lungs refusing to work properly. You fed her your garbage, Captain Shaft continued, his voice never rising above a whisper. Like she was a dog. Like she should be grateful. He drove his knee into Owen's stomach. Owen collapsed, vomiting bile onto his bedroom floor, the pain so overwhelming he couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. Captain Shaft crouched beside him, grabbed his hair, forced Owen to look at him. That woman you hit? That woman you mocked? She's my wife. Olivia Shaft is married to me. And you treated her like she was nothing. Owen's eyes widened with recognition and new terror. Everyone in Millbrook knew the name Captain Shaft, knew the rumors, knew that crossing him meant disappearing. And he'd just learned he'd humiliated this man's wife. "Your father's money is gone," Captain Shaft said, still holding Owen's hair. "His power is gone. Everything you had is gone. And you're going to spend the rest of your life understanding what it means to have nothing." He punched Owen in the mouth. Owen felt his front tooth shatter, felt blood fill his mouth, felt pieces of enamel cutting his tongue. "If you ever come near my wife again," Captain Shaft whispered, his face inches from Owen's, "I'll finish what I started tonight. Do you understand?" Owen nodded, crying now, blood and tears mixing on his face. Captain Shaft released him, let him collapse fully onto the floor. Owen lay there gasping, broken ribs making every breath agony, his mouth filling with blood from his shattered tooth, his entire body screaming pain. When he finally looked up, the room was empty. The window was closed. The only evidence anyone had been there was Owen's broken body and the blood on his bedroom floor. He tried to crawl toward his phone to call for help, but movement sent fresh waves of pain through his ribs. He lay there in the darkness, finally understanding that wealth couldn't protect him, that his father's influence was worthless, that he'd wronged someone far more powerful than any politician. Downstairs, Senator Les and his lawyers never heard anything. The beating had been delivered in complete silence. No witnesses, no evidence, just a lesson taught in darkness that Owen would carry in his body for the rest of his life. And somewhere across the city, Captain Shaft returned to his wife's apartment, kissed her forehead while she slept, and never mentioned where he'd been. Because some debts are paid privately, in shadows, where justice wears no badge and answers to no law except the unbreakable rule. Those who disrespect what we love are destroyed, completely and without mercy. We've reached the final chapter. If this story hit you, smash that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to see it. Comment your thoughts below and let me know what story you want next. Owen Les woke at 5:30 a.m. to an alarm on a phone with a cracked screen he couldn't afford to fix. The studio apartment in Millbrook's Western District was smaller than his former bedroom's walk-in closet, 300 square feet with a kitchenette, a bathroom where the toilet ran constantly, and a mattress on the floor because he couldn't afford a bed frame. The radiator clanked and hissed but barely produced heat. Owen could see his breath in the February air. He'd chosen groceries over electricity last month, which meant the heat stayed low and his phone charged at work. The $40 jar of sauce he'd once dismissed as cheap now represented a luxury he couldn't imagine affording. He dressed in clothes from Goodwill. Jeans with a small hole in the knee, a sweatshirt with a faded logo, work boots he'd bought for $12 that were already falling apart. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed someone he barely recognized. Thinner, exhausted. The gap where his front tooth had been made him look older, harder. He couldn't afford the dental work to replace it. His warehouse job started at 6:30 a.m. $12 an hour, 40 hours a week, minus taxes that left him with barely enough to cover rent and food. He loaded boxes onto trucks, his ribs, still healing wrong from where Captain Shaft had broken them, aching with every lift. His supervisor rode him constantly, knowing Owen had no other options, no connections, nowhere else to go. The other workers mostly ignored him. A few had recognized him from news coverage about his father's trial. Senator Richard Les had been sentenced to 23 years in federal prison 2 months ago, his appeals denied, his name now synonymous with political corruption. Owen was guilty by association, a rich boy who'd lost everything and thought he deserved sympathy. He didn't tell them about the tooth, the ribs, the night someone had entered his bedroom and taught him what real power looked like. That story stayed private, a nightmare he relived every time he tried to sleep. On a Tuesday evening in late February, Owen was walking home from work when he saw her. Olivia Shaft stepped out of Millbrook Community Clinic wearing scrubs, her left wrist no longer in a cast, her natural hair pulled back in the same simple style. She looked exactly as she had 6 months ago, beautiful, composed, unbothered by the cold. She carried a canvas bag over her shoulder and walked with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. For a moment, their eyes met across the street. Owen felt his breath catch. Part of him wanted to cross over, to apologize, to explain that he understood now, that he'd learned his lesson. But he couldn't move. The memory of that night, the hand on his throat, the ribs breaking, the whispered threat, kept him frozen on the sidewalk. Olivia's expression didn't change. She didn't look angry or satisfied or vindictive. She simply looked at him the way she might look at any stranger on the street, someone whose existence she acknowledged but didn't particularly care about. Then she turned and walked to a modest sedan, a Honda Accord, maybe 10 years old, where a man waited in the driver's seat. Owen recognized him immediately, even though they'd only met once, in darkness, with violence between them. Captain Shaft sat behind the wheel, his eyes meeting Owen's through the windshield for a brief second. No threat in that gaze. No warning. Just acknowledgement that Owen understood now, that the lesson had been learned, that there was nothing more to say. Olivia climbed into the passenger seat. Captain Shaft leaned over and kissed her, tender and familiar, the gesture of a man who loved his wife and would destroy anyone who disrespected her. Then they drove away, the Honda disappearing into evening traffic, leaving Owen standing on a cracked sidewalk in the neighborhood he used to speed through, finally understanding everything he'd been too privileged to see. He continued walking to his studio apartment, his breath visible in the cold air, his ribs aching, his stomach already calculating whether he could afford ramen for dinner 3 nights in a row or if he needed to stretch his grocery budget further. The walk took 20 minutes because he couldn't afford bus fare. His boots were letting in water through the deteriorating soles. 6 months ago, Owen Less had woken in a mansion with a private chef preparing breakfast. He'd driven a $300,000 G-Wagon. He'd worn clothes that cost more than most people earned in a month. He'd believed poverty was a choice, that wealth equaled worth, that people like Olivia Shaft were beneath him because they lacked money and connections. Now he understood that power existed in forms his education had never taught him. That the woman he'd dismissed as unimportant was protected by forces his father's political influence couldn't touch. That respect couldn't be purchased and dignity couldn't be stolen. That the world contained hierarchies invisible to wealth, where shadows were more powerful than mansions and loyalty was worth more than offshore bank accounts. He'd learned that some phone calls changed everything. That some debts were paid in full, in private, where justice wore no badge. That karma wasn't mystical, it was simply the consequence of actions meeting people who refused to let disrespect go unanswered. Owen climbed the 3 flights to his studio apartment, unlocked the door with a key that stuck, and entered the space that was somehow both everything he had and nothing compared to what he'd lost. His phone showed $17 in his bank account. Rent was due in 5 days. He'd have to ask his supervisor for extra shifts, maybe work the weekend, maybe skip meals to make the numbers work. He lay on his mattress on the floor, staring at the water-stained ceiling, feeling his broken ribs ache with every breath. His father was in federal prison. Their mansion was sold at government auction. His friends had moved on to other rich kids with intact reputations. His Instagram account sat abandoned at 3,400 followers, mostly bots and people who'd forgotten to unfollow. Everything Owen had believed about himself, about the world, about how power worked, all of it had been stripped away in 6 months. And the hardest lesson of all was understanding that he'd deserved it. That the woman he'd hit with his car, the woman he'd fed his garbage to like she should be grateful, had shown him more mercy than he'd shown her. She'd made one phone call and let the consequences teach him what wealth had prevented him from learning for 26 years. That every action has consequences. That humanity isn't measured in dollars. That some people who look powerless are protected by forces you never see coming. And that pride and privilege make terrible armor against the truth that we're all just people, some of us born lucky, some of us not, but all of us deserving of basic dignity and respect. Owen closed his eyes, feeling the radiator clank and hiss, feeling the cold seep through the thin walls, feeling the ache in his ribs that would probably never fully heal. Tomorrow he'd wake at 5:30 a.m. and do it all again, the warehouse, the $12 hours, the careful budgeting, the choosing between necessities because he couldn't afford both. And somewhere across the city, Olivia Shaft was home with her husband, planning her future in medical school, living the life she'd built through her own work and merit, unbothered by the rich boy who'd learned too late that the world didn't revolve around him. The story of Owen Less ended not with drama but with quiet understanding, that some lessons can only be learned through loss, That privilege blinds until it's stripped away, and that the woman he'd dismissed as nobody had been somebody all along. Just not somebody who needed his recognition, his approval, or his leftover food to know her worth.